And so the air in the UN Security Council chamber was thick, not with heat, but with something heavier. Tension. Cameras captured everything in silence, translators hovered with ready fingers, and dignitaries exchanged quiet, cautious words. At the far end of the oval table, two figures sat divided by national flags, diplomatic protocol, and decades of history, yet their ideologies hovered dangerously close to conflict. To the left sat Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, experienced, assertive, and unwavering. To the right, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, young, focused, and increasingly resolute. They had never met face to face. Their nations had never shared common ground. But today, circumstance placed them under one roof, with the world's eyes fixed on them. The moderator had barely begun introducing the next speaker when Netanyahu interrupted. "I don't need a speech," he said coolly, his voice carrying through the marble-lined chamber. "Let's not pretend." He gestured subtly, without turning. To Traoré. "This man represents nothing but disorder disguised as resistance. He's not a leader. He's a symbol. And symbols crumble under pressure." A few stifled gasps followed, some chuckles from Netanyahu's delegation. Traoré remained still, calm, composed, his gaze locked on the Prime Minister. When he rose, the room fell silent. No notes, no teleprompter, just Traoré, one hand resting on the table, the other holding a folder bearing Burkina Faso's national seal. "You call me a symbol," he began, voice steady and clear. "Perhaps I am, but I represent what your drones, your dollars, and your diplomacy have failed to erase." Silence gripped the chamber. "You've had decades," he continued, "decades to make my continent your playground, and yet I am still here. My people are still standing." He paused briefly. "Not because we crave conflict, but because we remember what you tried to erase." Netanyahu leaned back, the smirk on his face fading slightly, but Traoré pressed on. "You sit behind alliances, weapons, and media. I come from a land where children dig through soil for gold they'll never see. Yet they still sing. They still hope. That alone makes me more dangerous than you'll ever understand." The moderator tried to intervene. "Mr. President, perhaps we should—" "No," Traoré said, his voice firmer. "Let him hear this." Then, for the first time, he turned fully toward Netanyahu. "You said I'm just a symbol, but I'm the one you failed to silence. And every time you underestimate me, that symbol becomes stronger." Gasps. Then, silence. From the back of the room, a camera operator murmured, "Did we just witness history?" Outside, the hallways buzzed with reporters. Headlines were already taking shape. Traoré's words had sliced through diplomatic decorum, and Netanyahu knew it. Within minutes, the Prime Minister had been ushered into a private suite within the UN complex. Shielded from reporters, he paced before a wall of security monitors, showing live news coverage. "Who prepped him?" Netanyahu demanded. "Nobody talks like that unless they've been coached." An aide responded quietly. "Sir, reports say he wrote it himself. No script, no teleprompter." Netanyahu gave a short, bitter laugh. "So we're dealing with a revolutionary who memorizes speeches designed to provoke." But it wasn't the provocation that unsettled him. It was the delivery. Traoré hadn't raised his voice, no outbursts, just conviction, calmly delivered. Like a lecturer holding a scalpel. Across the hall, Traoré stood at a press podium, alone. A wall of cameras flashed. A journalist called out, "President Traoré, do you regret what you said to Prime Minister Netanyahu?" "No," he answered plainly. "I regret that it had to be said." Another asked, "Do you think it's wise to challenge a global power so directly?" Traoré offered a small smile. "Is it wise to oppress people for half a century and expect them to remain quiet?" That quote went viral in minutes. Back in his suite, Netanyahu stared at the live feed, jaw tightening. "Enough," he muttered. "Arrange a private meeting. I want to speak with him off the record." His aides paused. "Sir, that could be—" "I said now." That evening, under tight security, a discreet meeting was set up in a small room beneath the UN tower. The space was bare, just a long table, 2 chairs. No media, no advisors, only Traoré and Netanyahu. Netanyahu arrived first and remained standing. Traoré entered, composed as he was on stage. He placed a leather folder on the table, met Netanyahu's eyes, and stood silently. "You think you're above consequences now," Netanyahu began, his tone quiet but cutting. "You think you humiliated me in front of the world?" "I didn't come for you," Traoré answered. "I came for those who never get a chance to speak." Netanyahu chuckled. "You believe your words make a difference? Let me clarify. Symbols fade. Power doesn't." Traoré nodded. "True power," he replied, "is speaking the truth without needing permission." Netanyahu's fists tightened slightly, Traoré noticed. In that instant, both men understood this wasn't a dialogue. It was a battle, not of arms, but of narratives. In the dim silence, the pretense of diplomacy faded. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" Netanyahu said, stepping toward the table. "A man drunk on applause. You confuse cheers for credibility." Traoré didn't flinch. "And you mistake silence for consent?" The tension wasn't abstract anymore. It charged the air like electricity. The table between them suddenly felt too narrow. Netanyahu leaned in, his voice quieter, more biting. "You've caught the spotlight. That's it. In 6 months, the world will forget. You'll still be a minor figure from a country no one remembers." "My country isn't forgotten," Traoré said firmly. "It's been silenced. That's not the same." There was no anger in his voice, only resolve. Netanyahu, surprised by his composure, changed tactics. "Fine," he said. "You want to act like a statesman? Then learn this. Geopolitics isn't poetry, it's pressure. You apply it, or it's applied to you. That's how it works, and how it always has." "Not if we change the rules," Traoré said. Netanyahu's eyes narrowed. "You won't get far. You don't have the banks. You don't have the weapons. You don't even control the media." Traoré stepped forward. "But I have something you don't," he said calmly. "People who believe again. People who have nothing and nothing to lose. That's more dangerous than your missiles." Within hours, word of the meeting leaked. No footage, no transcript. But sources suggested Netanyahu had left first, and that fact alone made headlines. Western journalists scrambled for quotes. Meanwhile, African media called it the conversation of the century. On local radio in Ouagadougou, listeners spoke with pride. "He represented us," one farmer said. "He didn't kneel." Netanyahu's office rushed into damage control. Press statements painted Traoré as impulsive and inexperienced, warning his rhetoric could stall development. But the more they criticized him, the more his support grew. Social media lit up with memes. One viral image showed Traoré at the UN podium with the caption, "Not a symbol, a storm." And unexpectedly, even in Israel, not everyone stood with Netanyahu. Some progressive voices questioned why the prime minister devoted so much energy to discredit a young African leader. One columnist asked, "If he's truly irrelevant, why does his voice shake us?" The following morning, Traoré received an unexpected invitation. A closed-door roundtable at the Council on Foreign Relations in Manhattan. The attendees? Economists, think tank leaders, and senior diplomats from around the world. A room not designed for someone like him. His advisors had their doubts. "They'll try to contain you," one warned. "Let them try," Troy answered. "I'll speak where I'm heard, or at least where they pretend to listen." Inside, the setting was clinical, almost detached. Coffee mugs, leather seats, screens filled with graphs. Traoré, dressed in a dark blue boue, traditional and deliberate, stood out sharply. The moderator introduced him with a reserved smile. "President Traoré has certainly sparked global attention. Perhaps today he can offer some clarity." Polite chuckles followed. Traoré took the microphone, paused briefly, and began. "Let me make this clear. Africa is not a charity project. We are not here for Western experimentation," he continued, voice steady. "We are the beginning, and we remember what was taken." Several expressions tightened across the room. "You study us like we're a puzzle to fix." But the real issue, he said, sweeping his eyes across the table, is assuming power must always move in one direction, toward you. A woman from a European Development Agency interrupted, attempting to shift the tone. Mr. President, with all due respect, wouldn't a focus on partnership be more constructive than placing blame? Traoré turned to her calmly. A partnership based on debt, terms, and dependency isn't a partnership, it's a leash. The room went silent. At the UN, Netanyahu watched the live broadcast. He's not just talking to us anymore, one of his aides commented. He's speaking to everyone we've managed to keep silent for years. Netanyahu didn't respond. His silence said enough. Behind the scenes, Israel's foreign ministry began drafting a quiet campaign. Counter articles, diplomatic pressure, subtle messaging. But none of it stuck. Traoré wasn't targeting countries. He was calling out systems. And that made him harder to isolate. In Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, and Johannesburg, murals appeared overnight. Traoré's face beside slogans like, "We remember," "No permission needed," "Power answers to people." Back home, elders gave him a new name in Masi Kalpoko, the one who spoke back. 3 days after the council session, Traoré received a private message via an informal intermediary. No insignia, no formal header, but the tone was clearly governmental. The message was short. We should talk, quietly. Jerusalem is open to discreet dialogue. His advisors debated intensely. It's a trap, one said. They'll try to neutralize you through diplomacy or worse. Another countered. It means they see him as a real threat. That gives us an edge. Traoré listened quietly, then replied. Said the call, but we record everything. The video call was set for 3:00 IEM Ouagadougou time. 2 Israeli officials appeared on screen, not Netanyahu, but close allies. The conversation opened with formalities, then turned strategic. We don't need to be opponents, one official offered. You're rising in prominence, we can support that. If you're willing to moderate. Traoré asked. Define moderate. No more provocative speeches, no talk of colonial theft. Focus on development and security. Avoid historical grievances. Traoré gave a cold, knowing smile. You want me quiet, but still proud. We want your success, the official replied, just not at the cost of stability. And there it was, the deeper concern. He wasn't just a national figure anymore. He was reshaping narratives. After the call ended, Traoré said nothing. He stared at the frozen screen, pixelated faces speaking in offers that masked pressure. They don't want peace, he finally said to an advisor. They want compliance. The next morning, he released a short video. No script, just him. Sitting beneath a baobab tree, the wind brushing against him. I've been asked to tone things down, he said. But I've seen too many silences dressed up as peace. I wasn't chosen to stay quiet. I was elected to speak, honestly, even when the truth is uncomfortable. The video went viral within the hour. Watching from his residence, Netanyahu frowned. This isn't just about Africa anymore, he said quietly. And he was right. From Latin America to Southeast Asia and even parts of Eastern Europe, students, activists, and writers began sharing clips of Traoré. They called him the voice from below. He wasn't asking for power. He was showing that power didn't need permission. It began in Accra, then Tunis, and finally Bogotá Senate assemblies began quoting Traoré in their speeches. Not just African students, but young people from overlooked parts of the world recognized a voice, unafraid to speak out. At a university in São Paulo, a mural appeared overnight. It depicted Traoré's silhouette, with his fist raised. Below it, the words, "Silence isn't neutral, it's permission." Meanwhile, Netanyahu's inner circle grew uneasy. His poll numbers, steady for months, had started to dip. Not because of Traoré directly, but due to the narrative forming around him. Why is this man dominating the headlines? Netanyahu demanded during a late-night meeting. Has no military, he runs no central bank, yet here we are, reacting to every word he says. The younger aide answered cautiously. Because he doesn't speak like a politician. He speaks like someone who was never meant to be heard. And that resonates. Netanyahu slammed his hand on the desk. We've faced nations, we've faced armies. I will not be challenged by a speech. But on the streets, the momentum was undeniable. Burkina Faso's embassies received letters not from governments, but from everyday people around the world. One said, "I'm 22. I've never heard a leader speak like you. You made me believe we're not too small to matter." Traoré never set out to lead a global movement. Yet the void was real, and many were filling it with his voice. Back home, farmers in Boilasso wore shirts reading, "Unbought, unbroken." In local markets, elders repeated his UN remarks like proverbs. I regret that I had to say it at all. It was no longer just a statement. It had become a philosophy. At a diplomatic dinner in Brussels, a German ambassador raised his glass and half-joked, "Who knew the most dangerous leader of 2025 wouldn't carry a gun?" But a sentence. There were nervous chuckles. That same night, Netanyahu returned to his study. He stared at an old black-and-white photo on his desk, shaking hands with a former African president, a man who had once pledged loyalty in exchange for aid. They used to call. Netanyahu muttered, "Now they retweet Traoré." Global Economic Summit in Geneva was expected to be routine. Press statements, panel discussions, scripted speeches. But once it was announced that both Netanyahu and Traoré would attend, everything shifted. Security tripled. Media coverage intensified. Analysts called it the most anticipated ideological face-off of the decade. When the day arrived, the conference hall buzzed with tension. Netanyahu was first to speak. He approached the podium with practiced calm, delivering remarks on stability, responsibility, and the demands of seasoned leadership. His tone was steady, his gaze unwavering. Near the close of his address, his words sharpened. We must not mistake noise for vision. We cannot let those who romanticize rebellion undo decades of genuine progress. Everyone understood who he meant. Polite applause followed. Then Ibrahim Traoré took the stage. No notes, no aids. He began not with words, but with silence. 10 seconds, then 20. Only his eyes moved, calmly scanning the room. There is a kind of peace that sounds like quiet, he began, and a kind of quiet that smells like fear. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't have to. They say I romanticize rebellion, he continued. But what's romantic about hunger? About villages the world forgot? About children who can identify drones before they've seen a stethoscope? A soft murmur passed through the crowd. Traoré pressed on. I don't seek to destabilize the world. I'm here to remind it of what it chose to forget. Backstage, Netanyahu sat motionless, but his fingers twitched slightly against his chair. A Swiss journalist whispered, "We're witnessing a generational reckoning." An older French official scoffed, "We're watching theater." But a delegate from South Sudan leaned in and said quietly, "Sometimes, theater is the only way to speak the truth no one wants to hear." That evening, clips from the summit flooded every social platform. One image in particular went viral. Netanyahu frowning in the front row. Traoré on stage behind him, speaking with quiet intensity. Caption, "The empire speaks, the earth replies." 2 days later, Ibrahim Traoré sat down for a rare interview with American journalist Valerie Crane, renowned for her sharp questions and zero tolerance for fluff. The studio was neutral, gray walls, clean desk, no flags. But the world was watching. Rain leaned forward, gaze steady. "President Traoré, let's be direct. Some claim you're more of a cult icon than a head of state. Do you enjoy the spotlight more than the responsibility?" Traoré remained composed. "I never asked for the spotlight," he said. "But if standing in it exposes what others have kept hidden, I'll remain here." The interviewer pressed further. "You've been accused of encouraging anti-Western sentiment. Is that your intention?" "My aim," he replied calmly, "is to promote dignity. If that makes some uncomfortable, they should question why." Then came the moment everyone anticipated. "Netanyahu referred to you as a symbol. Do you see yourself that way?" Traoré paused thoughtfully. "A symbol only matters," he said slowly, if it withstands fire. Traoré leaned back. And have you? Every time I speak, he answered, steady and assured. Someone tries to destroy what I represent, and every time, more people light their own flames. That one response echoed across platforms. Within hours, the quote appeared as graffiti on T-shirts and in protest chants. A symbol only matters if it survives fire. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's office issued an unusual statement. Leadership demands maturity. Some prefer theatrics. Israel remains committed to responsibility. Yet even Israeli media outlets acknowledged a shift. Traoré wasn't fading, he was gaining momentum. A private think tank memo leaked weeks later captured the change with one striking sentence. We miscalculated. Traoré isn't looking for approval. He's exposing our foundations. In Burkina Faso, Traoré walked along dusty village roads newly connected to solar power, part of a Pan-African initiative he had quietly championed. A young girl, barefoot and smiling, ran to him. Mama says you're not scared of the powerful men. Traoré knelt and whispered back, Tell Mama, I'm only strong when you believe you are too. That moment was meant to remain private. But buried deep within a declassified European intelligence file was a memo, later leaked, titled, Project, Contain Emerging Influence in the Sahel. It detailed a coordinated strategy by several Western nations to monitor, discredit, and, if needed, politically isolate Ibrahim Traoré. The language was technical. Neutralize message effectiveness, limit diplomatic visibility, use proxies to question legitimacy. It was explosive. Within 48 hours, media outlets from Nairobi to New York reported on it. Hashtags surged globally. Even previously silent leaders condemned what they now called neo-colonial surveillance. Although not directly named, Netanyahu was implicated via diplomatic cables mentioned in the annex. He called an urgent press conference. Efforts to shape global narratives exist, he said, but promoting conspiracy theories about silencing African voices is reckless and harmful, but the impact was irreversible. That night, Traoré addressed the public not from a stage but from street level in Ouagadougou's Independence Square. Wearing a simple linen shirt and leather sandals, he stood among the people. Today, he said, you've seen the evidence. They don't fear our weapons, they fear our voices. Not our armies, but our students. The crowd erupted. We were once told our story began with their arrival. Now they're afraid because we're writing our own chapters. He turned toward the cameras. To those who tried to erase us in silence. Your quiet isn't enough anymore. The world is listening. International media couldn't look away. CNN aired the full speech without interruption. The BBC provided a live translation. Especially even Al Jazeera featured it during prime time. The soft revolution. How Traoré is redefining leadership. From a secure location, Netanyahu watched in silence. We created this, he muttered. Each time we dismissed him, we helped build him. His chief aide asked, Do we respond again? Netanyahu replied grimly, No. At this point, anything we say only amplifies him. 6 months later, at the African Continental Forum in Dar es Salaam, the audience stood in applause before Ibrahim Traoré even spoke. He no longer appeared as a rebel or agitator, but as something more troubling to his critics. A consistent leader. Behind him on stage was a simple inscription. No throne, just soil. He walked slowly to the podium, letting the silence settle. We were once called just a symbol of resistance, of disruption, even of chaos. Yet here we are, not scorched, not silenced, but thriving. His tone was steady yet warm. They tried to turn symbols into cages. But a chosen symbol can also become a sword. He gestured lightly toward the crowd. You are not here to applaud a person. You are here to witness yourselves. Everything, this entire movement, was built not with wealth, not with approval, but with belief. In Tel Aviv, Netanyahu remained seated in a quiet office, his screen filled with images of leaders from Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia. once seen as peripheral, now central in the global dialogue. A staffer leaned in. Had signed a trade coalition with Brazil, Indonesia, and Egypt. Netanyahu didn't reply. He stared at the screen, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. Finally, he murmured. I told him he was just a symbol. A pause, but I never asked what that symbol meant. Outside the forum, after stepping off stage, Traoré was approached by a young journalist, out of breath. President Traoré, if you could speak to Netanyahu now, what would you say? Traoré turned and smiled softly. Nothing. He already hurt me. So did the world. He walked away, without bodyguards or a motorcade, but through the crowd, exchanging handshakes and eye contact at every step. Above the entrance to the forum hung a new banner, a symbol that couldn't be erased. What started as a dismissive comment, "You're just a symbol," became the spark for a movement. Ibrahim Traoré never needed to raise his voice. His calmness spoke louder than anger. His restraint proved more disruptive than outrage. Where others projected power, he embodied presence. Once dismissed by presidents and prime ministers, he no longer stood in opposition, but as a new direction. A quiet reminder to the world. Dignity doesn't need permission. And symbols, sometimes they outlast the fire.